My name is Martha, and at 68 years old, I never thought my only son Anthony would leave me shivering on his doorstep in Michigan's brutal winter. We were so close after his father died, but everything changed when Regina entered our lives. For years, I supported them financially, from their house down payment to the children's education funds. That Christmas Eve, as I stood freezing outside while they opened presents without me, something in my heart hardened along with my fingertips. Before I tell you how I turned the tables on my ungrateful family, let me know where you're watching from in the comments, and if you've ever had to teach your children a tough lesson, hit that like button and subscribe. I became a single mother 30 years ago, when my husband Richard suffered a massive heart attack at 42. The shock nearly destroyed me, but I had no time to fall apart with a 15-year-old son depending on me. I worked 2 jobs, administrative assistant during weekdays and waitressing weekends, just to keep our modest home and ensure Anthony could pursue his dreams. College wasn't optional in our household, though paying for it seemed impossible after Richard's death. I sold our second car, took out a second mortgage, and put every spare penny toward Anthony's education fund. My lunch was often just a peanut butter sandwich so he could have proper meals and the textbooks he needed. When Anthony was accepted to Michigan State University with a partial scholarship, I cried with pride, knowing every sacrifice had been worthwhile. Throughout his childhood and teenage years, Anthony and I were inseparable. We had movie nights every Friday, and even as he grew older and his friends became more important, he'd still save Sunday dinners for just us. He'd tell me everything about school, his friends, and later his college applications. I cherished being his confidant and biggest supporter. When Anthony started his sophomore year of college, he called me bubbling with excitement about a girl in his economics class. Regina was smart, ambitious, and came from what he called a good family in Chicago. I was thrilled he'd found someone special, though a small part of me worried about losing my place in his life. The first time Anthony brought Regina home during spring break, she seemed perfectly nice, if a bit reserved. She complimented our small home, though I noticed her eyes lingering on our dated furniture and modest decor. She asked polite questions about my job at the insurance office but seemed more animated when discussing her family's lake house and her father's position at a prominent law firm. Their wedding 3 years later was an elaborate affair, primarily funded by Regina's parents. I contributed what I could, though it was clear my modest check was a drop in the bucket compared to the lavish reception they planned. During the ceremony, I sat alone in the front row on the groom's side, acutely aware of the stark contrast between the handful of guests on my side and the packed rows across the aisle. Regina's mother frequently introduced me as Anthony's mother, rather than by my name, and I overheard her commenting about my sensible blue dress to another relative. Despite these subtle slights, my heart soared when Emma was born 2 years later, followed by Lucas 18 months after. Becoming a grandmother gave me a new purpose, and I threw myself into this role with unbridled joy. I'd drive the 45 minutes to their house at a moment's notice when Anthony called saying they needed a break, spending hours rocking colicky Emma or reading stories to toddler Lucas. The first real sign of trouble came when Emma was about 3. I'd brought a homemade doll I'd sewn for her birthday, spending weeks perfecting the tiny clothes and embroidered face. Regina quickly set it aside, commenting, "That's sweet, Martha, but she has so many toys already. Maybe save it for when she's older." Later, I found it tucked in the back of Emma's closet, never played with. Around this time I noticed Anthony calling less frequently. Our Sunday dinners became monthly, then occasional. Regina always had a reason. The children were too tired, they had other plans, Anthony had work to catch up on. When I did visit, Regina would often be on her phone or suddenly remember errands she needed to run, leaving me with the children and Anthony. Yet whenever they needed financial help, the phone would ring promptly. When they found their dream house in an upscale neighborhood, Anthony called asking if I could contribute to the down payment. I withdrew $60,000 from my retirement savings, nearly a third of my nest egg, to help them. 6 months later, Regina needed a new SUV because her sedan wasn't practical for the children. Another $15,000 from my savings account. I never hesitated. These were my only grandchildren, my only son. I wanted them to have opportunities one couldn't provide for Anthony growing up. I established education funds for both Emma and Lucas, contributing $500 monthly from my modest pension and Social Security. Every birthday and Christmas meant generous checks, in addition to the thoughtful gifts that increasingly seemed to disappoint. As my 70th birthday approached, Anthony suggested it might be time for me to consider downsizing to a retirement community. I loved my small home, filled with memories of Richard and Anthony growing up. My garden gave me purpose, and my neighbors had become close friends over the decades. The suggestion stung, especially when I realized it came shortly after I mentioned that my property value had increased significantly due to new development in the area. I'm perfectly capable of maintaining my home, I told Anthony firmly, and I'm not ready to leave the place where your father and I built our life together. The conversation ended awkwardly, but I noticed Anthony and Regina exchanged glances that made me wonder if they'd already been considering what my house might be worth on the market. Over the next 3 years, visits with my son's family became increasingly rare and uncomfortable. Regina always seemed to have an excuse ready whenever I suggested coming over or having them visit me. Emma has dance practice, or Lucas isn't feeling well, or we already made plans with friends. I tried not to take it personally, but the pattern became impossible to ignore. When family gatherings did occur, I often found myself excluded from important moments. Anthony's 40th birthday party was held at an expensive restaurant where Regina seated me at a table with distant acquaintances rather than with the immediate family. When I asked Anthony later why I wasn't included in the family photos, he seemed genuinely surprised. "Mom, I thought you were in those." Regina handled the photographer. One Saturday afternoon, I arrived 30 minutes early to help with Emma's 10th birthday party. From the driveway, I could hear the children already playing in the backyard. Rather than ring the doorbell and interrupt, I walked around to the side gate. That's when I overheard Regina speaking to her mother. "Anthony's mom is coming soon. I told him we don't need her here early, but he insists. She'll probably try to take over everything like usual." Regina sighed dramatically. "And she'll bring some handmade gift that Emma will have to pretend to like. I've already told Emma she can put it straight in the donation pile." I froze my hand on the gate latch. The casual cruelty in her voice made my stomach churn. Worse was Emma's reply. "Grandma Martha always gives weird presents. Can't she just give money like Grandma Catherine?" I almost turned around and drove home, but I couldn't bear the thought of Anthony calling later, wondering where I was. So I retreated to my car, waited 20 minutes, then approached the front door as if I'd just arrived. That evening I tried to talk to Anthony about what I'd overheard. We were alone in the kitchen while I helped clean up after the party. "Anthony, I think we need to discuss something that's been bothering me." He barely looked up from loading the dishwasher. "What's up, Mom?" "I feel like Regina doesn't want me around the children. Or you for that matter." Anthony straightened immediately, his expression defensive. "That's not true. Regina has always been welcoming to you. I overheard her today talking about me to Emma, about my presence being weird, and telling Emma she could donate whatever I gave her." Anthony's face reddened. "You must have misunderstood. Regina would never say something like that." "I know what I heard, Anthony." He slammed the dishwasher shut. "Look, Mom, Regina works hard to create a certain kind of home for our family. Sometimes your homemade gifts don't exactly fit with what the kids are into these days. It doesn't mean she doesn't appreciate the thought. It's not about the gifts, Anthony. It's about respect. Regina respects you. We all do. But you need to respect our parenting choices too." His tone made it clear the conversation was over. After that confrontation, the distance grew even wider. Emma and Lucas became increasingly standoffish during my visits. Once affectionate grandchildren now barely looked up from their expensive electronic devices to acknowledge me. When I asked about school or activities, their answers were monosyllabic at best. For my 68th birthday, I received no calls, no cards, nothing. When I finally called Anthony 3 days later, he sounded genuinely mortified. "Mom, I'm so sorry. We've been so busy with the kids' activities. Let me put you on speaker so everyone can wish you happy birthday." In the background, I heard Regina prompting the children in whispers. Their half-hearted birthday wishes felt worse than being forgotten. Thanksgiving that year marked another painful milestone. Regina had invited over 20 people, including her extended family and several couples they knew from their country club. I arrived with my traditional sweet potato casserole and cranberry relish, only to find Regina had catered the entire meal from an upscale restaurant. "Oh, Martha, you didn't need to bring anything," she said, taking my dishes and placing them on a side table where they remained untouched throughout the meal. When dinner was served, I discovered I'd been seated at a small card table in the corner with Regina's elderly aunt who was hard of hearing and two teenagers who spent the entire meal texting under the table. From my isolated position, I watched Anthony carving the turkey at the main table, surrounded by Regina's family and their friends. Despite these slights, when Anthony called about financial matters, I never refused. Emma needed $5,000 for a school trip to Europe. Lucas required expensive hockey equipment. Their private school tuition increased. Each time I wrote a check without question, hoping my generosity might somehow bridge the growing gap between us. The pattern became clear. My presence was tolerated, my financial support expected. When I declined to fund Emma's study abroad program because I'd already committed to helping with her upcoming high school tuition, there was a notable chill in Anthony's voice. 2 days later, Regina called personally to invite me to Christmas Eve dinner, the first such invitation in years. "We really want you to be part of our holiday this year, Martha," Regina said, her voice uncharacteristically warm. "The children miss you." I wanted to believe her. Perhaps the holiday season had softened her heart. Maybe this was an opportunity to repair our fractured relationship. I accepted eagerly, hope rising that this Christmas might mark a new beginning for our family. Christmas has always been special to me. After Richard died, I maintained our family traditions, determined to give Anthony joyful holidays despite our loss. Each year, I baked Richard's favorite cookies, hung the ornaments Anthony made in elementary school, and wrapped presents with the care and attention that says, "You matter to me." This Christmas Eve, I approached with renewed hope. I spent days selecting thoughtful gifts for everyone. A vintage brooch I'd inherited from my mother for Emma, who had recently shown interest in jewelry. A signed first edition of a science fiction novel for Lucas, who loved reading. A handcrafted leather portfolio for Anthony, and even an expensive cashmere scarf for Regina in her favorite color. I woke early that morning to prepare dishes for our dinner. Though Regina hadn't asked me to bring anything, I made my famous apple pie and cranberry bread recipes passed down through generations of my family. I carefully packed everything in insulated containers to keep them warm during the 45-minute drive to their house. The weather forecast predicted snow, so I left earlier than necessary. The roads were already slick as fat snowflakes began falling, reducing visibility and forcing me to drive well below the speed limit. Still, I arrived right at 4 o'clock, the time Regina had specified. Balancing gifts in one arm and food containers in the other, I made my way carefully up their icy walkway. Christmas lights twinkled along the roofline, and through the large front windows, I could see their enormous tree glittering with coordinated ornaments. Nothing handmade or sentimental, just picture-perfect decorations that matched Regina's carefully curated home decor. I rang the doorbell, then waited. From inside, I could hear laughter and Christmas music. When no one came, I shifted my packages and rang again. Still nothing. The temperature was dropping rapidly as darkness fell, and the wind cut through my coat. I set down the food containers to retrieve my phone and text Anthony. "I'm outside. Just arrived." 3 minutes passed before he responded. "Sorry, lost track of time. Hold on." I waited, stamping my feet to keep circulation going. Through the window, I could see movement in the living room. The family gathered around the tree, opening presents. Emma was holding up something that made Regina clap her hands in delight. Lucas was already playing with what looked like a new electronic device. They were having Christmas without me. Another text from Anthony. "In the middle of opening presents. Give us a few minutes." The cold was becoming unbearable. Michigan winters don't mess around. The temperature had dropped to 11 degrees below zero with the wind chill factor. I had dressed warmly, but standing motionless on an exposed porch was dangerous in these conditions. "Anthony, it's freezing out here. Please let me in. Just 5 more minutes. Regina wants to finish this round of gifts." I couldn't believe what I was reading. My fingers were growing numb as I typed. "I can't stay out here. It's dangerously cold." Almost done. By now, I'd been standing outside for almost 20 minutes. My toes had lost all feeling despite my winter boots. The tips of my fingers burned painfully when I flexed them. My face felt frozen, and I was beginning to feel confused. An early sign of hypothermia I recognized from my winter safety training as a school volunteer. I knocked loudly on the door, abandoning politeness in favor of self-preservation. Still no one came. I considered returning to my car but worried about appearing petty or overreactive. Surely they wouldn't leave their elderly mother outside much longer in these conditions. After 35 minutes, the door finally opened. Anthony stood there in a festive sweater, looking mildly annoyed at the interruption. "Sorry about that, Mom. We got caught up in the excitement. No apology for leaving me in dangerous cold. No rush to help me with my packages. No concern for my well-being." I stepped inside, my body shaking uncontrollably from the cold. The house was warm and smelled of roasted turkey and cinnamon. In the dining room, I could see the table was already set, and they had eaten without me. Dirty plates sat stacked near the kitchen door. "Where should I put the food I brought?" I asked, my voice trembling from both cold and emotion. Regina appeared, wine glass in hand. "Oh, we've already had dinner. The children couldn't wait. You can just put it in the kitchen. We'll have it tomorrow." I stood in their grand foyer, feeling like an unwelcome intruder rather than family. My carefully selected gifts seemed suddenly inadequate among the mountain of expensive packages under their tree. "Grandma's here," Anthony announced half-heartedly to the children, who barely looked up from their new possessions. I placed my gifts under the tree, next to the few remaining unopened packages. Emma reluctantly put down her phone when prompted to open my gift. Her expression upon seeing the vintage brooch was one of polite disappointment. "Thanks, Grandma," she said flatly before setting it aside. Regina picked it up, examining it with a critical eye. "Is this an antique? It looks rather old-fashioned." "It was my mother's," I explained. "She wore it on her wedding day." "How sentimental," Regina replied with a tight smile. When she thought I wasn't looking, she whispered to Emma, "We can return it for something better." Lucas opened his book with similar indifference, barely glancing at the signed first page before asking if he could go back to playing his new video game. Anthony thanked me for the leather portfolio but set it aside without much interest. Regina unwrapped her cashmere scarf with raised eyebrows. "This is quite nice, Martha. Must have been expensive for you." The condescension in her voice was unmistakable, as if I couldn't possibly afford quality items on my limited budget, as she'd once described my retirement income. As I thawed physically, a coldness settled in my heart. I watched this family, my family, surrounded by excessive material wealth but lacking basic compassion or gratitude. The children tossed aside gifts valued at hundreds of dollars as if they were nothing, immediately asking what else they were getting. The final blow came when I overheard Regina in the kitchen, thinking I was in the bathroom. She was speaking to Anthony in hushed tones, but the house's open floor plan carried her words clearly to where I stood in the hallway. "Don't forget to ask your mother about contributing to the kitchen remodel before she leaves. If we mention how much the children would enjoy having a better space for family gatherings, she'll probably write a check on the spot." Anthony's response was quiet but unmistakable. "I'll catch her before she goes. 20,000 should cover the new countertops and appliances." They weren't just neglecting me emotionally. They were actively planning to exploit me financially. In that moment, something fundamentally changed inside me. The hurt transformed into clarity, and I knew exactly what I needed to do. I didn't confront them immediately. Something inside me had gone quiet and cold, like a lake freezing over in winter. I made my excuses shortly after, claiming the worsening snow made me nervous about driving after dark. "But you just got here, Martha," Regina protested weakly, though I noticed she didn't insist I stay. "I'll call you tomorrow, Mom," Anthony said, barely looking up from helping Lucas assemble some complicated electronic toy. Neither of them offered to help me to my car. No one seemed concerned about my driving home alone in a snowstorm after showing signs of hypothermia. I left without Anthony ever asking about money for their kitchen remodel. The drive home was treacherous and lonely. Snowflakes swirled in my headlights, creating an almost hypnotic effect. Normally, such conditions would terrify me, but I felt strangely calm. The emotional pain had clarified something I'd been avoiding for years. My relationship with my son's family had become purely transactional. I was an ATM, not a beloved mother and grandmother. As I carefully navigated the slippery roads, I mentally tallied the financial support I'd provided over the years. The house down payment, the car, private school tuition, summer camps, sports equipment, family vacations, emergency expenses, college funds. It had to total well over $300,000, a significant portion of my retirement savings and home equity. When I arrived home, I made myself a cup of hot tea and sat in Richard's old armchair, the one possession I'd refused to replace after his death. "What would you do?" I asked aloud, as I often did when facing difficult decisions. Richard had been firm but fair, never one to be taken advantage of. The day after Christmas, I called Patricia, my financial advisor, and requested an emergency appointment. "Martha, I'm concerned about these withdrawals," Patricia said as she reviewed my accounts. "You've taken out nearly 40% of your retirement fund in just 5 years. At this rate, you'll deplete your savings long before your actuarial life expectancy." I nodded, feeling a strange combination of embarrassment and resolve. I've been supporting my son's family. I thought I was helping, but I've realized they've come to expect it. Patricia's expression softened with understanding. She'd been my advisor since Richard died and knew how important family was to me. "Your generosity is admirable, but it's my job to ensure you're financially secure for the rest of your life. These withdrawals are unsustainable." She showed me something else that made my blood run cold: small, regular withdrawals from the educational accounts I'd established for my grandchildren. These accounts required dual signatures for major withdrawals, but apparently smaller amounts could be taken with just Anthony's authorization. "These don't appear to be educational expenses," Patricia noted, pointing to withdrawals that coincided with luxury family vacations and purchases of high-end electronics. The evidence was irrefutable. My son had been siphoning money intended for his children's education for discretionary spending. My next stop was Barbara, an attorney who specialized in elder law. I'd met her through my church's legal aid program for seniors. "Martha, I'm troubled by what you're describing," Barbara said after hearing about both the financial situation and the Christmas Eve incident. "It sounds like financial exploitation, possibly even elder abuse given the incident in freezing temperatures." "I don't want to pursue legal action against my son," I clarified quickly. "I just want to protect myself going forward." Barbara nodded. "Let's develop a threefold plan. First, we'll freeze access to all accounts you control. Second, we'll document all financial support you've provided. Third, we'll update your estate planning to protect your assets." Over the next few days, I wrestled with mixed emotions. The thought of cutting off financial support to my grandchildren pained me deeply. What if they interpreted it as punishment? What if Anthony never let me see them again? Yet I knew continuing the current pattern would only enable their behavior, while jeopardizing my own security. I had to set boundaries, something I'd failed to do since Regina entered our lives. I decided to wait until after New Year's to implement the changes. One last holiday season before everything changed. I spent those days reviewing old photo albums, remembering the little boy who once made me handmade Mother's Day cards and the young man who'd promised to always take care of me in my old age. What had happened to that son? Had money and status corrupted him so completely? Or was he simply under Regina's influence, unable to stand up to her demands? Either way, I realized I hadn't done him any favors by always saying yes, by never setting limits, by allowing him to take me for granted. Sometimes love means saying no. A lesson I was learning far too late. On January 2nd, I called Harold at my local bank branch and arranged to freeze the joint accounts I'd established for my grandchildren's education. Next, I visited Eleanor, a new estate attorney recommended by Barbara, to update my will and establish a trust that would provide for my grandchildren's education directly, bypassing their parents' control. Finally, I created a detailed ledger of all financial assistance I provided over the years, complete with dates, amounts, and purposes. The total shocked even me. $327,000 over 12 years, nearly half my life savings. With these protective measures in place, I waited for the inevitable fallout. It came sooner than expected. The first call came 3 days after I froze the accounts. Anthony's name flashed on my caller ID around 9 in the morning. "Mom, there's some kind of problem with Emma's tuition payment. The school called saying our check bounced." I took a deep breath. "Yes, Anthony. I've made some changes to the accounts." "Changes? What kind of changes?" His voice rose with alarm. "I've frozen the educational funds temporarily." "You've what?" The shock in his voice was almost comical. "You can't do that. The spring semester starts next week." "Actually, I can. The accounts are in my name with you as a secondary signer. I've also discovered withdrawals for non-educational purposes, which violates the terms I established." Silence filled the line for several seconds. When Anthony spoke again, his voice was low and controlled. "Mom, what's this really about? Is this because of Christmas?" "We apologize for the mix-up with timing." "No one apologized, Anthony. You left me outside in dangerous cold for over 30 minutes, had dinner without me, opened presents without me, and then discussed how to get more money from me for your kitchen renovation." Another lengthy silence. "You misunderstood. We weren't." "Please don't lie to me," I interrupted, surprised by my own firmness. "I've supported you and your family generously for years. I've contributed over $300,000 while being treated with increasing disrespect. That arrangement is now over." "Mom, you can't just." "I can and I have. I suggest you make other arrangements for Emma's tuition. You and Regina have good jobs. The money I've been providing was always meant to be supplemental, not your primary resource." Before he could respond, I heard Regina's voice in the background demanding to know what was happening. The phone rustled as it changed hands. "Martha, what do you think you're doing?" Regina's voice was sharp with indignation. "Setting boundaries that should have been established years ago. You're punishing the children because you're angry with us? That's incredibly petty." Her attempt to manipulate me might have worked a week earlier, but not now. "I'm not punishing anyone. I'm ensuring my own financial security while encouraging you and Anthony to take responsibility for your family's expenses. The children will be devastated. Is that what you want? To hurt innocent children?" What hurt them was watching their parents leave their grandmother in freezing temperatures while they opened Christmas presents without her. What hurt them was learning that gifts and money matter more than people. "Those are the lessons you've been teaching them, Regina, not me." Regina's tone changed from indignant to threatening. "Anthony told me you've been having memory problems lately, getting confused about plans. Maybe it's time we discussed assisted living options. For your own safety, of course." The implied threat chilled me. They would question my competence rather than acknowledge their behavior. My memory and cognitive functions are excellent, as my doctor confirmed at my physical last month. I've documented everything, Regina, including the Christmas Eve incident and all financial transactions. My attorney has copies." That silenced her momentarily. "Then, this isn't over, Martha. Anthony, talk to your mother." The phone changed hands again. Anthony's voice sounded strained. "Mom, please reconsider. The kids' education will continue to be important to me. But moving forward, any financial support will come with conditions of basic respect and consideration. I suggest you and Regina have a serious conversation about your priorities." I ended the call feeling simultaneously empowered and heartbroken. For decades, I'd avoided conflict at all costs, especially with my only child. Standing my ground felt foreign but necessary. 2 days later, as I was tending to my winter houseplants, a car screeched into my driveway. Anthony, Regina, Emma, and Lucas piled out and approached my front door. This unannounced visit was unprecedented. They hadn't been to my home in over a year. I opened the door before they could knock. "This is a surprise." "We need to talk," Anthony said, his expression grim. "All of us as a family." I invited them in, noticing how the children slouched behind their parents, clearly uncomfortable. Regina's face was set in a hard mask of displeasure. Once seated in my living room, Anthony began. "Mom, we're here because we need to resolve this situation. Emma's school is threatening to give away her spot if tuition isn't paid by Monday. That sounds like a problem you and Regina need to address," I replied calmly. Regina couldn't contain herself. This is ridiculous. You've always paid Emma's tuition. You promised you would. I promised to help with their education, yes. But that promise was made with the understanding that I would be treated as a valued member of this family, not as a convenient source of funding. So this is blackmail, Regina spat. Pay us or love us.
No, Regina.
This is a boundary. For years, I've provided financial support while accepting emotional neglect. That arrangement no longer works for me. Anthony leaned forward. Mom, if this is about Christmas Eve. It's about a pattern, Anthony. Christmas Eve was simply the moment I could no longer deny what's been happening. I turned to my grandchildren, who had remained silent throughout the exchange. Emma, Lucas, I want you to know that I love you both very much. My issues are not with you, and I will always support your education and future. But the way things have been handled isn't healthy for any of us. Emma looked confused. So you're not paying for my school anymore because Dad and Mom made you wait outside? The simplified version from a 13-year-old's perspective made the adults shift uncomfortably. It's more complicated than that, I explained. Your parents and I need to re-establish mutual respect and clear expectations. Part of that involves them taking more financial responsibility for your education and other expenses. Regina stood abruptly. I will not be lectured about respect by someone threatening to derail my children's future. Anthony, your mother is clearly becoming irrational. This reinforces my concerns about her mental state. That was when I walked to my desk and retrieved the folder I'd prepared. Here's a documented account of all financial support I've provided over the past 12 years, totaling $327,000. Here are bank statements showing withdrawals from the children's educational funds for family vacations and electronic devices. And here's the report from my geriatric specialist, dated 2 weeks ago, confirming my excellent cognitive health. Anthony took the folder with trembling hands. As he flipped through the pages, his face paled. He clearly hadn't realized the total amount I'd contributed, or that I had evidence of the misused educational funds. Regina snatched the folder. This proves nothing except that you've kept meticulous records of your supposed generosity. If you were truly generous, you wouldn't hold it over our heads. I never mentioned these amounts until now, I pointed out. You've simply grown accustomed to my financial support while treating me with increasing disregard. The confrontation continued to escalate, with Regina growing more defensive and Anthony caught in the middle. I could see him struggling, torn between his wife's demands and the undeniable evidence of their exploitation. Emma began to cry. I don't understand what's happening. Why is everyone fighting about money? Lucas, though younger at 11, seemed to grasp more of the situation. He looked at his parents with newfound skepticism, then at me with confusion. This isn't just about money, I told Emma gently. It's about how we treat the people we love. Regina had reached her limit. We're leaving. Anthony, come on. I told you this was a waste of time. She grabbed her purse and stormed toward the door. She's just a bitter old woman who's trying to control us through her money. We don't need her. Anthony hesitated, looking between his wife and me. For a moment I thought he might finally stand up to Regina. Instead, he sighed heavily and followed her, ushering the confused children ahead of him. We'll figure this out, he said quietly as he passed me. Just give us some time. After they left, I sat alone in my suddenly quiet house, wondering if I'd just lost my son and grandchildren forever. Had I done the right thing? The question haunted me through a sleepless night as I replayed the confrontation over and over in my mind. I didn't expect Regina's next move. 2 days after our confrontation, my phone began ringing with concerned calls from church friends and former colleagues. Martha, are you okay? I just saw Regina's post about you, said my friend Judy from the senior center. What post? I asked, bewildered. Regina had launched what could only be described as a social media campaign against me. On her Facebook page, she'd written a long, emotional post about elderly parents suffering from cognitive decline and the difficult decisions families face when grandparents become irrational and begin making harmful financial decisions. Though she never mentioned me by name, everyone in our social circle knew exactly who she meant. She described symptoms of dementia that I'd never exhibited and painted herself and Anthony as devoted caregivers concerned only with my well-being. The comments section filled with sympathetic responses from her friends, many offering advice about elder care facilities and attorneys specializing in guardianship proceedings. The implied threat was clear. If I didn't restore their financial support, they might challenge my competence and autonomy. I was still absorbing this shock when my doorbell rang. It was Susan, Anthony's older sister from Richard's first marriage. Though we'd always maintained a cordial relationship, we weren't particularly close. "I saw Regina's post," she said without preamble. "It's disgusting, and I'm here to help however I can." Susan had always seen through Regina's facade. Living in Seattle, she wasn't regularly involved in our family dynamics, but she'd witnessed enough during her infrequent visits to form strong opinions. "She's been isolating Anthony from everyone who might influence him," Susan told me over coffee. "Did you know she blocked my calls to his cell phone?" He only found out when I mentioned it at a family funeral last year. My other stepdaughter Jennifer soon joined our impromptu support group. Between them, they began countering Regina's narrative, sharing their own experiences with me that demonstrated my mental sharpness and legitimate concerns about how I'd been treated. Friends from church and my volunteer groups also rallied around me. Many had witnessed Regina's dismissive behavior toward me at community events or heard her complaints about my interference when I'd simply asked about the grandchildren. Most surprisingly, I received a call from Catherine, Regina's mother. We'd never been close. She'd always maintained a polite but distant relationship with me, clearly considering her daughter to have married down. "Martha, I feel I must apologize for my daughter's behavior," Catherine said, her normally imperious tone subdued. "Regina's post about you was brought to my attention, and I want you to know I don't condone it." I was speechless. Catherine had never reached out to me directly before. "I've been concerned about Regina's spending habits for years," she continued. "Her father and I raised her with significant privilege, but we never intended to create such entitlement. When she married Anthony, we hoped his more grounded nature would temper her materialistic tendencies. Instead, it seems she's influenced him." Catherine revealed that Regina had systematically alienated Anthony from anyone who questioned her behavior or spending. She'd done the same with her own parents when they'd refused to fund a vacation home 2 years earlier. "She didn't speak to us for 6 months until her father had a health scare," Catherine confessed. "We've been walking on eggshells ever since, afraid of losing access to our grandchildren." This conversation gave me valuable perspective. Regina's behavior wasn't uniquely directed at me. It was a pattern she'd established with anyone who set financial boundaries with her. Meanwhile, Anthony remained silent. He didn't call or text, didn't defend me against Regina's implications, didn't reach out to check on my well-being. His absence spoke volumes. Then came the incident that forced everything to a head. My neighbor Deborah called me one Tuesday afternoon, her voice urgent. "Martha, there's someone trying to get into your house. I saw a woman using a key at your back door. I was at the grocery store a good 15 minutes from home. Call the police," I instructed. "I'm not expecting anyone, and nobody should have a key except Anthony." By the time I returned home, a police officer was taking a statement from Deborah, who had witnessed Regina entering my house and leaving with several items. When confronted, Regina had claimed she was picking up things for Anthony's mother who wasn't feeling well. The officer explained that since Regina had used a key presumably given to her by Anthony, who was legally allowed to have one, it wasn't technically breaking and entering. However, removing items without my permission could constitute theft. An inventory of my home revealed what was missing: my mother's jewelry box containing several valuable heirloom pieces, a small collection of silver serving pieces I'd inherited from my grandmother, and oddly, the folder containing my financial records of support to Anthony's family. I filed a police report documenting the incident. That evening my phone rang. It was Anthony, calling from a number I didn't recognize. "Mom, can we meet tomorrow? Just you and me." His voice sounded strained, almost desperate. "Not at your house or mine. Somewhere neutral." We arranged to meet at a small diner halfway between our homes. I arrived early, selecting a booth near the back for privacy. When Anthony entered, I barely recognized him. He'd lost weight, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. He looked like a man under tremendous stress. "I'm using Jennifer's phone," he explained as he slid into the booth. "Regina checks my call logs. She doesn't know I'm here." For 2 hours, my son poured out everything. How Regina had gradually isolated him from friends and family. How she'd manipulated him into asking me for money repeatedly. How she intercepted cards and letters I'd sent to the grandchildren, telling them I'd forgotten birthdays when I hadn't. How she'd deleted voicemails I'd left and accidentally overlooked invitations I'd extended. "The Christmas Eve thing wasn't an accident," he admitted, eyes downcast. "Regina deliberately told you the wrong time. We'd already eaten and opened most presents when you arrived. She said it would show you that we could celebrate without you, that we didn't need you except for—" His voice trailed off. "Except for my money," I finished for him. He nodded miserably. "I've been a coward, Mom. I've allowed this to happen because it was easier than standing up to her. When you froze the accounts, everything exploded. Regina was furious, not just about the money, but because you'd challenged her control." "And the break-in at my house?" Anthony's face crumpled. "She took my key without telling me. When I found out what she'd done, we had a huge fight. I'm staying at Susan's place right now. The kids are with me." This revelation stunned me. Anthony had never stood up to Regina before, certainly not to the point of separation. "She wanted to sell your jewelry to pay for Emma's tuition," he continued. "When I refused to go along with it, she said I was choosing you over our family's well-being. But Mom, what she wanted to do was stealing. Plain and simple." Anthony reached across the table and took my hands in his. "I don't expect you to forgive me right away. What we did, what I allowed to happen, was inexcusable. But I want to make things right. I've contacted a family therapist. The kids and I have already had one session." Tears filled my eyes. "The children must be so confused." "They are. But Dr. Henderson is helping them understand that families need mutual respect, not just material things. Emma actually asked to call you yesterday. Regina had told her you didn't want to speak to them anymore." "That's absolutely untrue. I've been calling regularly." "I know that now." Anthony squeezed my hands. "Mom, I've made so many mistakes. I let Regina come between us because it was easier than confronting the truth. I've been complicit in mistreating the person who sacrificed everything for me." Over the following weeks, Anthony, Emma, and Lucas began regular visits. Sometimes at my house, sometimes meeting at parks or restaurants. Regina refused to participate, instead escalating her social media campaign against me and demanding Anthony return home. Her ultimatum backfired spectacularly. When she threatened to file for divorce if Anthony didn't choose his family over his mother, he calmly replied that he was choosing his family, all of his family including me, over her manipulative behavior. With the help of Dr. Henderson, we began the painful but necessary process of healing. Emma and Lucas learned the truth about their grandmother's generosity and their mother's deceptions. Anthony confronted his enabling behavior and the damage it had caused. And I examined my own role in creating unhealthy financial dependencies. The road wasn't smooth. Regina hired an attorney and tried to gain full custody of the children, citing Anthony's unstable living situation with his sister. But her previous social media posts about my alleged cognitive decline backfired when her attorney attempted to question my influence over Anthony. The documented evidence of her entering my home without permission and taking valuables further undermined her case. By spring, Anthony had filed for divorce and secured a small apartment where the children stayed with him half the time. He'd taken full financial responsibility for their education and expenses, working overtime and scaling back their previously lavish lifestyle. For the first time in years, I saw glimpses of the son I'd raised responsible, caring, and principled. The painful freezing point of Christmas Eve had ultimately thawed something that had long been cold between us: honesty. 6 months after that fateful Christmas Eve, our family looked completely different. Anthony had finalized his divorce from Regina, receiving joint custody of Emma and Lucas. He'd moved into a modest 3-bedroom townhouse, significantly downsizing from the luxury home he'd shared with Regina. The children were adjusting to their new normal with remarkable resilience. My relationship with Anthony transformed through our shared commitment to rebuilding trust. Our weekly Sunday dinners resumed, now including Emma and Lucas, who took turns helping me prepare family recipes they'd never learned before. "I wish we'd done this years ago," Emma told me one Sunday as we rolled out pie crust together. "Mom always said cooking was a waste of time when restaurants could make food better." "Some things taste better when they're made with love," I replied. "Even if they're not perfect." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "Like your brooch. I'm sorry I didn't appreciate it at Christmas." Mom said old jewelry was embarrassing, but now I understand it has history. It's special because it connects us. Such moments of insight from my grandchildren happen regularly now. Lucas had started a notebook of Grandma's stories, recording family history and wisdom I shared during our visits. Both children showed genuine interest in my life and experiences, asking questions about their grandfather and what their father was like as a child. Anthony had taken financial responsibility seriously. He consulted with a financial advisor to create a budget that covered all essential expenses, including the children's education. He'd taken a second job teaching weekend accounting classes at the community college to supplement his income. "I never want to model financial irresponsibility for them again," he told me. "They need to understand the value of money and hard work." I'd established new education trusts for Emma and Lucas with strict oversight. The funds could only be accessed for verified educational expenses, with statements sent directly to both Anthony and me. This transparency ensured the money would be used as intended while teaching my grandchildren financial accountability. Our healing process wasn't without challenges. Regina continued to paint herself as the victim of a controlling mother-in-law, though her audience had diminished as more people witnessed our family's positive changes. She remained focused on material status, often undermining Anthony's more modest lifestyle during her parenting time. "Mom lets us order whatever we want at restaurants," Lucas reported after one weekend with Regina. "She said you and Grandma are being cheap." Anthony used such moments as teaching opportunities. "There's a difference between being cheap and being responsible," he explained. "Grandma taught me that distinction too late in life, but I'm grateful to understand it now." I'd experienced personal growth as well. Through therapy, I recognized my tendency to use financial support as a substitute for setting appropriate boundaries. I'd enabled Anthony and Regina's behavior by making it too easy for them to take advantage of my generosity. New friendships enriched my life through increased involvement at the senior center. I joined a book club and a gardening group, connecting with women who valued me for myself, not my checkbook. My sister Dorothy and I planned a European river cruise, my first significant vacation in decades. Most importantly, my relationship with Anthony now rested on authentic emotional connection rather than financial dependency. We could disagree without fear of rupture. We could discuss difficult topics openly. We could acknowledge past mistakes while focusing on a healthier future. One evening, as we sat on my porch watching the sunset after dinner, Anthony turned to me with tears in his eyes. "I still can't believe I left you standing in the cold that night," he said quietly. "When I think about what could have happened." I took his hand. "We can't change the past, Anthony. What matters is that it became a turning point for us all." "It's ironic," he reflected. "By freezing the money, you thawed our relationship. For years, everything between us was cold and transactional. I didn't realize how much we'd lost until Regina's ice shattered." Emma and Lucas joined us on the porch, carrying the board game we played each Sunday evening. As we set up the pieces, I looked at these three precious people and felt profound gratitude. The financial cost had been high, but the emotional reward of authentic connection was immeasurable. The coldest winter day had indeed taught me that true warmth comes from mutual respect, not from opening your wallet but closing your eyes to mistreatment. Sometimes, freezing more than just bank accounts is necessary to thaw the hearts of those who have grown cold to what really matters. Have you ever had to make a difficult decision that hurt in the moment, but ultimately healed your family? Share your experience in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more journeys of healing and transformation. And remember, sometimes the most valuable inheritance we can leave our children isn't in our bank accounts, but in teaching them the priceless worth of respect and genuine love. Thank you for joining me today, and may your own family connections grow stronger through both the warm and cold seasons of life.